Hi everyone, my name is Josh and I'm the program coordinator here with Global Connections. I'd like to welcome you all tonight to our webinar, On the Road to a PhD. I'm super excited to have a Global Campus alum, Emily, back with us tonight to talk about her journey and how she got from a Global Campus student to pursuing her PhD in psychology. So without any further ado, let's welcome Emily.
Thank you, Josh. I'm very happy to be here tonight. Thank you for joining us, those of you that are here. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the name of our webinar is On the Road to PhD, Trials, Tribulations, and hopefully giving you some helpful advice to help navigate your road to a PhD. So, again, my name is Emily Carstens Namie, and I started my path towards a PhD a long time ago. My first experience with online learning was when I went back to school to get my transfer degree so that I could apply to and attend WSU Global. It seemed to fit very well for me. I was a full-time employee. I was doing legal assisting in a criminal defense office and decided I wanted to go back, and I found that the flexibility of an online degree was very advantageous for me, as it probably is for those of you that are here. But it hasn't been an easy road all the way. I graduated in December of 2012 with a primary concentration in psychology and a secondary in criminal justice. And I now have my master's in psychological science from Montana State University. However, that was not my original path. Originally, I applied to graduate school to PhD programs, and I had the first time around, and as I will discuss along the way, the first time around I didn't make it. I was not accepted in a doctoral program. I did get into Montana State University in a master's program, and that helped me along the way get into University of North Dakota, where I'm at now. And I'm studying psychology and law in that intersection. So it's been a path of persistence, so to speak. And hopefully tonight what I hope to gain is to help you overcome some of the obstacles or give you some of the information that I had a hard time finding on my own. I was into my second year at WSU before I decided I wanted to go and get my doctorate degree. But the first thing I had to do was address why I wanted to go to graduate school. And so that's the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, why do you want to go to graduate school? And this is also the first question that I ask when I'm approached by undergraduates. I often mentor undergraduates because I'm an instructor in some of their labs and such, or a TA in their classes. And I always have them start with that. Begin with your end in mind. What do you want to do with it? Or is it just the next step? And if your answer to that is that it's just the next step in my education, it's what I think I should do, I seriously encourage people to reconsider their motive for going, because I'm going to tell you right now, graduate school is hard. It is very, very difficult. It's very challenging. It's very rewarding as well. But a lot of times people think they need a PhD when they really maybe could get a master's or a PhD degree. And so if you're more wanting to counsel people and not really, it just depends on the depth that you want to go with your degree. So really start in your research process, start thinking about what you're going to do with this. And so once you decide that you do need a PhD, you need to figure out the next step. There's a lot of decisions along the way. The next decision is, what track do you want to have? Two primary tracks are clinical and experimental. Clinical tends to deal with treatment and that's your traditional psychologist that most people think of, where when people have problems they go see a psychologist. Clinical tracks are still very research-based as well. So I do recommend there are people that don't want to do research. So I recommend if you don't want to do research so much and you just want to treat people, you might consider looking into a Ph.D. program, which is like a clinical program, except for it doesn't have the heavy research emphasis like a clinical psychology program does. Another track that's possible is an experimental track, which is what I am. I'm doing an experimental track, and that was a decision I had to make, and that I didn't know which one I wanted, clinical or experimental, because I really wanted to focus on forensic and work in that intersection of psychology and law. But it was through additional interviewing of potential mentors and the process that really clarified to me that I wanted to go experimental. And it also depends on what you want to do. Jobs in experimental are going to be more the things that you're going to do in academia. You're going to ideally have a goal to teach and research at a university rather than work with clients and provide treatment. Whereas that's what your focus would be in clinical. However, a lot of clinical track students end up going into academia as well, where they teach, research, and also have counseling or treatment on the side, and their own private practice on the side, or they work with a health industry within the mental health industry. There's also school psychology and forensic psychology. So if you're interested in working with children or school-age children or working with inmate populations, you might consider one of those tracks as well. So it comes down more to research, which gets us to the next stage. Now, you've decided, we're taking it as if you've decided to do this PhD program, you want to get into a doctoral program. So what do? You start preparing. You start preparing now. If this is your first semester in WSU in your undergrad program, or whether it's your last semester, the earlier you start preparing, the better. The application process starts way before the actual deadline, and it starts with research. You need to do your research and start finding universities and programs that are doing what you want to do. And this, again, I'm going to be hitting a lot of research emphasis on this, is in that process, you're going to be identifying your areas of research interest. What do you want to study? What do you want to research? What do you want to eventually be maybe teaching in the future, if that's your goal? So you need to find out who's doing what you want to do, and so that you know where to apply. And this sounds like a simple step, but it can actually be rather daunting as you start delving into it. Some things to look for are one of the things, most programs are funded, and when I talk about funding, that means that they usually pay your tuition, and they give you a stipend for being a TA, which is a teaching assistant, or a research assistant as a graduate student. And a lot of time, and the pay on that varies depending on the program and the school. But it usually requires about 20 hours of work as a TA or RA, and as well as your research requirements and classes that you're required to take. So you want to, and most PhD programs or doctoral programs are set up for that. Your Ph.D., when I mentioned the Ph.D. programs, those are not necessarily set up and funded programs, so you have to look for alternative sources of funding for that. And when you reach the graduate school level, you no longer receive federal grants, but you are still eligible for federal financial aid, depending on your individual, I guess, whether you qualify individually for that. So if you qualify for it now, you probably will as a grad student. The other thing, when trying to narrow down your fields of interest, that is very helpful in that is reading. Do journal search articles and read research journal articles to find out what interests you, and those can also be guides to show you who's doing what you want to do. and show you what institutions and what researchers to contact. Another main tip is be organized. One of the ways I started out was just having different folders in my web browser bookmarks. I had folders for potential programs that I was interested in, and as I narrowed down my search, I created actually a binder or a notebook where I listed the requirements for every program that I was interested in, because some of them have different focuses and want different experiences and have different requirements for applying to them and getting in. So, and this is kind of it's not really a linear process, so you're going to probably be doing a lot of this simultaneously or going back and forth between, you know, some of these things. But let's say that you've identified at least a few programs that you're interested in. So then what do? You build a rapport with the professors. You basically find professors that you're interested in working with or that you want to apply to work with, and contact them and try to build rapport. This was really, again, another daunting task for me. I held professors on a high pedestal, which is not unnecessary, but I also had very low self-esteem, and so I felt very unworthy to be talking to them. So it really inhibited me from contacting them for a long time, and I finally took the time and started with emails and introduced myself. And this is probably the best way to do it, is just introducing yourself to the professors that you're interested in working with, and telling them who you are, where you're from, what your research interests are, and asking them if they are accepting students in the fall of the year that you plan to start your program. Another good thing to do is also ask questions about their lab and their research. A lot of researchers love talking about their research. Plus, one of the most important relationships you're going to have in graduate school is your mentor relationship, the relationship that you have with your mentor advisor. And the way that graduate school is set up is you usually have one or two mentors that oversee you, that you work very closely with for 5 to 7 years, depending on the program you're in. So this is one of the most important relationships that you'll have in the future. So it's very good to try to start developing those relationships to begin with. So you started doing that, you started looking at that. The other thing that people ask me is, what do I need to prepare for my applications? And what are some of the main things? Well, different schools have different requirements for their applications, but some general things that they look for are GPA, GRE, references, and statements of purpose. So in regards to your GPA, just know that your grades matter, especially your undergrad GPA. When I applied to graduate school the first time, I was waitlisted at UND, which means I was put on the waiting list, and they rank those in order of the people that they want in. And unbeknownst to me, I'd actually, if I had waited on the wait list instead of accepting the offer from MSU, I would have gotten into UND my first time around. And I found that out when I interviewed the second time around. And the guy that was waitlisted behind me actually got in, and he said that it was only because I had accepted the MSU position. However, he had his master's degree. So this really shocked me. He already had his master's degree at that time when we both applied together, and I only had my undergraduate. And he told me that one of the reasons why I was ranked higher than him was because my GPA was much higher. I had a 3.9 something GPA, and he only had like a 3.0 in his undergrad. And so they weighted that undergrad GPA much heavier than they weighted his master's level or graduate level GPA. So keep that in mind. However, if your GPA is not the best, and it's not super solid, you can make up a lower GPA with higher GRE scores. And the GRE is a standardized test, in case you don't aren't familiar with the term, it's a standardized test, much like the SAT, that graduate schools require as a general measure of general knowledge. And I recommend that you start studying early. This is one of the problems that I had. I did not do that. And my GRE scores sucked. I'm just going to be honest. They were low. They were not very good. I took them twice, and the first time I applied, I took my GREs twice, and got the same, didn't improve my scores. I got the same score both times, and I really think it was because I didn't discipline myself and study and start studying for the GRE early enough. Use some sort of book or study course if you can. I thought I would be okay with the study course or the book the first time. The second time I applied to graduate school, I decided to retake the GREs, and I took a study course. Unfortunately, I still didn't end up disciplining myself well enough to study enough to improve my scores, but I still got in, so there's hope. Anyway, as far as GREs go, also, you may also want to plan to take the psychology subject test, which is additional money, but and it's not usually required by all schools, but sometimes they want to see it, or sometimes the individual professor that you want to work with wants to see it. So be sure to ask any of your professors that you contact whether they would like you to take that or not. If they do, then just plan on taking it. And I do believe it's only offered typically twice a year, depending on your location. I know in Montana it definitely was only offered twice a year, but it's a more rural area. They might be available more in more urban areas. So the third thing on this list is references, and this poses a unique challenge to me being an online student. Many of my courses online were taught by graduate students, and I didn't have that face time with professors to try to build rapport, build relationships with professors. And you need 3 recommendations. You need 3 letters. Most schools require 3 letters of recommendation. I ended up having to figure something out because I didn't have 3 letters of recommendation. Luckily, I had a graduate student mentor that was one of my instructors who asked me to be a research assistant on a project she was working on. So I was able to actually do some distance work with her and got a reference from her, but she still wasn't a professor. So you may have to get creative in that, but I do believe that WSU Global has addressed this issue. I've heard from several sources that there's a link to additional graduate resources, including references and mentoring opportunities through Blackboard. If you look for that link on Blackboard, I think it's somewhere there, but I haven't gotten confirmation about that. And then the other thing that you're going to need to do is come up with a statement of purpose. And this goes back again to figuring out some of your research desires, because you're going to list your research interests, your goal, your professional goals. You're going to also, this is your introduction to tell them who you are, what you're about, what's important, and why you're applying to their program. And there are a lot of resources online on how to write a good statement of purpose, which I recommend that people do your research on this. What makes a good one? I could probably do a whole webinar on what makes a good statement of purpose. Like, such things as avoiding general statements like, I just want to help people. They want something deeper than that. So what I did in my statement of purpose is I created a generalized one in sections, and I had one section specifically on why I was applying to each program, and I would tailor that for each program, pulling out of their websites their focuses and the things that I thought what drew me there. So do some research on how to do your statement of purpose, or send me an email, or I'll answer any questions about that as much as I can tonight. So the next thing, another important part of your application will be a CV. And what a CV is, in case you don't know, is basically, it's kind of like a resume, only it highlights your experiences rather than the jobs that you've had. So your goal in the next few years, or however long between now and when you apply, is to find desirable experiences to add to your CV. And the #1 desirable experience that you can add to your CV is research experience. And again, this was another roadblock, another barrier that I had to try to figure out how to overcome when I was a global campus student. As most research is conducted on campus, and the opportunities to participate in research online or at a distance were very limited. I do believe this is another one of the things that our WSU Global has addressed, and so I do believe that there are means to having, or at least they're trying to address opportunities for research. And again, I do believe that's found in that link on Blackboard, but through that link in Blackboard. But I can't access WSU Blackboard anymore since I'm no longer a student, so I can't confirm that because I haven't seen it, or even tell you where it is. But that's kind of a change that I'm really happy to see happen, because research is the most important thing that they look for. That is what kept me out of PhD programs my first time around, was I did not have enough research experience. I had a great job history. I had a 3.97 GPA. My GRE scores were acceptable but not stellar, but and my other things were great, but I just didn't have that research experience. So get creative. One of the things that I did was, one of the professors I was going to apply to work with, I asked him if he had any volunteer opportunities in his lab that I could fulfill from a distance. And he taught, and so I got to learn coding and volunteer at his lab from a distance. So these are some things that you might want to consider in your search for research opportunities. The other thing that you can add to your CV that's very helpful is volunteer and internships. And this serves to more than one purpose. This looks good to academia and to those that are going to be interviewing you and reviewing your application. But more importantly, it will help you narrow your interests. One of the volunteer experiences that I had was when I was still trying to figure out whether I wanted to be clinical or experimental, was I volunteered for Spokane Mental Health on their mental health hotline. And that gave me an incredible amount of experience that looked great on my CV, but it also very quickly let me determine that clinical is not my path. I can't do that. It drained me. There were just things that clinical wasn't something that I am built for. And it helped me determine that well before I was into a program and regretting it. So these kind of internships and volunteers opportunities can be very invaluable. The other thing that's really good to add to your CV that is much easier to accomplish as a global student is school service. Find ways to get involved with WSU. You can, or as WSU on campus, WSU online, or if you're in a remote area where you can do a satellite, an alternative campus other than Pullman. But get involved in one way or another. Some of the ways is like an ASWSU Global Senator, or through Global Connections, a Global Connections Ambassador, or perhaps on one of the committees, one of the Student Senate committees. I was a senator for the last year of my time at WSU, and it was invaluable. I learned a ton about academia in general, and it helped me feel more connected to WSU as my alma mater. And it helped me make some very good interpersonal connections. One of my reference letters ended up being from Dave Soleil. I was very fortunate to work with him as a senator, so that gave me a creative avenue for another letter of recommendation. So seek out these school services. The other thing that on the committee thing, even if you don't want to commit to being a senator, they always have committees that they need members for. And your opinion and your thoughts and your views are very needed just to make a difference for other people. If I have to say, I don't know, I hope that my service made a difference. I've seen a lot of the changes that we started when I was on government being that actually come to fruition, and it's very fulfilling, as well as a good CD line. So next, let's talk about money. Money. You're going to need to learn to budget, have a budget for this. Not only of your money, but of your time. And so hopefully plan accordingly. Applications have fees. I've paid anywhere from $30 to $120 for an application fee, and they add up quick. So keep that in mind. The other thing is that most schools want official transcripts from all the schools you've attended. And yes, even from your community colleges, if you received an AA transfer degree like I did. The other transcript that I had to come up with was when I was in WSU Global. It was before they had an intro psych class at WSU Global, so I had to take that through Bellevue. So every time I applied, I had to get transcripts from my community college, from Bellevue College, and from WSU. And then this time when I applied, I also had to add MSU to that. And these all cost money, most of them. My community college doesn't charge, but Bellevue and MSU uses the National Clearinghouse, which charges, depending, between $5 and $10 a piece. WSU, I think, charges about $5. It's pretty reasonable, but it's still all a budget item, so keep that in mind. The other thing about budgets is the GRE, and that's probably one of the most expensive things on the front end of applying is your GRE cost, because it costs upwards of $200 to take the GRE every time you take it. And I think the psychology subject test is $125, or it was at the time when I took it. So not only do you have to pay to take it every time, you also have to pay to send it to schools. You get to give it to 4 schools for free, but anything beyond that, I think it used to be $25 per school. So if you're applying to 8 schools, you're going to be paying $100 just to send GREs out. So think about that when you're planning where you're going to apply and everything. And also plan accordingly for your deadlines. And this is where I'm talking about budgeting your time, because transcripts and GRE results take time to get to your intended schools. So you need to plan that accordingly and order those things well ahead of time before your deadline. So the next question I get asked a lot is, how many programs do I apply for? And my first thing is, what's your budget? How many can you afford to apply for is really going to be, that's a lot of people's limitation, is how much have they budgeted for, how much can they afford. I recommend applying to about 6 programs. Some people recommend up to 12 to increase chances of being accepted. I mean, rule of numbers, right? The more you apply, the more you increase your chances of being accepted. But like I said, it really comes down to your budget. And how in the schools that you choose to apply for, I break them up into about 3 categories. Try to do 1 to 2 programs that you are your dream programs. That if you got in, that would be hitting it out of the park for you. And that you would just absolutely love to go to them. Then you have 2 mid-range programs that you'd be really interested in going. You'd be very happy there, but they're not your top choices. And then you have 1 or 2 that are your backup or your last resorts that you'd go to if you didn't get into your top choices. But don't apply to them if you wouldn't go there. For instance, there's a program in Ohio that I was really interested in. I liked the professor, but I did not want to be there. I did not want to be in Ohio. I did not want to be, I knew that I would not be successful being that far away from my family. Or, so it's kind of, so don't apply to them. Don't waste everybody's time and money to do that if you don't think you're going to, if you wouldn't go there. You might get in, but what's the point of getting in if you're just not going to be happy there and you won't go, or you drop out to begin with. So with that, let's look at deadlines. Most applications are due between November and January. So when you are planning out your application process, keep in mind everything that needs to get there, transcripts, letters of reference, GRE scores, and your materials. Because one of the things that really threw me off in my application process the first time around was almost every school uses online applications. They do their letters of reference electronically, where they send emails out to your references and have them send in their letters and then fill out a survey, a questionnaire about you. And MSU didn't do that. I didn't realize that until a week out. Right, you know, I was like in this mode of, oh yeah, electronic applications. Well, I had to submit everything paper, and they had to send everything paper to my references, and I really cut it close, and I almost didn't meet their deadline because of my own negligence of not looking at how their application went, whether it was a paper or electronic. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. And I'm going to touch back on letters of reference again here, because this is an important one to keep in mind when you're looking at your deadlines and asking for letters of reference, because this is really, you've built these relationships with people, hopefully, but you still want to make sure that you ask for a favorable letter. This may seem kind of silly, and it feels very awkward to ask someone that you've developed a relationship with on some level if they'll give you a favorable reference. But most professors will give someone a reference. They're not going to say, no, I won't give you a reference. But if you don't have a very developed relationship, or maybe maybe it's not as strong of a relationship as you thought, they might just give you a very general letter of reference rather than a favorable one, which can be about as bad as a bad letter of reference, if that makes sense. So ask for a favorable letter. When I was, you know, again, this was one of the obstacles I had the first time I applied. I finally figured out, oh wow, I need these letters of reference from professors, sent out emails to all my professors for my classes. I got one response, and he said, you know, and he was luckily nice because I didn't know to ask for a favorable. I just said, would you be a reference? And he came back and said, I'll be a reference, but I can't really comment or say anything other than you were in my class and you got this grade and you seem to be a good student. And that's not going to do you any good. So just a little experience there. The other thing to do having to do with deadlines is informing your references of your deadlines, letting them know how many schools you plan to apply to, and making sure that the application timeline fits their availability. If your application due date is the 20th of December and they plan on being incommunicado as soon as finals are done, that's probably not going to work if you wait till the week before the due date to get things going. So again, make sure that these deadlines are meeting their availability. And one of the things that I did with my application, with my references, was that when I made an application, or when I completed an application, I sent an email to my references letting them know that they should expect a letter requesting, or they should receive notification requesting a letter of recommendation, the school they should expect it from, and the deadline that they need to respond with. Because that just really helps them have all that information in one place, and they are very busy. They don't have time to manage to keep in the front of their mind your deadlines. So So just a little bit there. Let's see. So we've made it through all of that. Let's just say you got interviews. I mean, it's a frantic rush doing your applications. Because you're also doing these applications while you're doing finals, while you're doing your regular schoolwork, and then you have this big waiting period. You know, January and February can be horrific sometimes. But if all things go well, you'll be invited to interview. And these can be personal one-on-one interviews, or they can be group interview weekends like they do here at UNB. Some places like MSU only did phone interviews when I interviewed with them. So, but I really recommend if you are offered an interview in person, hopefully you've budgeted for it, and I would recommend you go. Because going to the interview allows you to do several different things. For one, it allows you to make the best impression, because in-person impressions I think are the best. I think it gives you a chance to really clarify who you are, what you're about, what your interests are. But also importantly, it allows you to make sure that this school is a good fit for you. And that this mentor is a good fit for you. When you're in grad school, one of the most important relationships that you will have is that mentorship, that relationship with your mentor or advisor. And this person like I said, it's usually set up with one, maybe two advisors or mentors that you have in grad school that you work exclusively with over the next 4 to 7 years, depending on your program. So this person plays a key pivotal role in your development as a professional in psychology. So it's important to have a good fit, because it's really hard to change course in the middle of that. When I first interviewed at UNB, my mentor that I had was my intended mentor at the time that I interviewed with is not the person I'm working with today. When I interviewed the first time, I just didn't hit it off with that person, and it didn't fit, it didn't feel right. Plus, I came to UNB at the end of February, and it was 0 degrees out, and it was gray, overcast. It was a horrible experience for a place to be, as far as, but I loved the program. I really like the program, but I was like, you know, it helps you make that decision if you have several options of what's going to be best fit for you. And but then when I went back the second time, I realized I loved the program, and I had a mentor. I found another mentor that I clicked with, and that I really fit with much better, that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't just come here for the interview. So this is going to be probably one of your biggest decisions, is who you end up wanting to work with. And you get that by in-person. You get that best through in-person. However, if it's not in your budget, definitely do your phone interviews. But again, make sure when you're doing your interviews that the interview process, remember that this is for you too. It's for you to make sure that it's a good fit for you, not just applying to whoever will take me, and I'm going to go wherever they'll take me. And I also want to remind you to be patient. This is a process. Graduate school and applying to graduate school is a process, and you may not get into the program, a program, or even the program of your choice the first time around. I didn't. I'm very glad I had a backup, so I would highly recommend that you have a backup. At least apply to one master's program or one program that you're pretty sure you're going to get into, because that might end up being where you belong and the best next step for you, especially if you don't get into a program your first time around. And if you choose wisely in your master's program, it can be a very good step to getting into a PhD program. I feel very grateful to have the experience of my master's program through MSU. It really helped me prepare for graduate school, and hindsight being 2020 as it is, I really realized that I really wasn't as prepared for graduate school the first time around as I thought. So when you're considering master's programs as a backup, try and look for ones that have empirical theses available. And what that means is that you do a research project as your master's thesis rather than just a literature review or writing a paper. If you are wanting to go on to a PhD program, and if you want that program to have the best, if you want to have the best chances of that program accepting your master's degree and not making you redo your master's work. I'm very fortunate at UND. They accepted my master's degree because the master's program, my master's thesis was empirical. I did research, and it went through the standard process that it would have if I was in a PhD program. So try to choose wisely on that. There's a lot of options out there, and just keep at it. So at this point, I'm pretty much done and open for questions.
It looks like, Emily, what kinds of things were you looking for in psych programs?
Okay, what I was looking for in the psych program was, first of all, I was looking for where I'm going to go from here. Let's see, how do I say this? Well, first of all, I was looking for what research opportunities am I going to have? Is this in the field is this going to prepare me for the field I want to go into? So that was a very helpful one for me. The other thing that I looked for again was reputable programs that I would be able to ideally get jobs from. The second time I applied, I was much more focused in my applications because I also wanted programs that ideally would accept my master's work as well, so I didn't have to start over from zero. But that wasn't a deal breaker for me. It was just a nice to-do thing. Looking for a funded program, a program that will cover tuition and reimburse and give you an opportunity for a GTA or to be a PA or an RA was very important to me because I really didn't want to incur too much more student loan debt if I don't have to. So let's see, those were real, but ultimately it was more the relationship, the research focus and the relationship with the mentor, and finding the second time around, finding a good mentorship relationship was my top priority because I knew that my success as a student was going to be tied to the mentor that I had.
That's just a comment from Olivia. She says that she's planning on getting a PhD in psychology with a focus on clinical. So she's really enjoyed the presentation. She's stressing about the competitiveness and how to really prepare.
Oh, well, I would like to comment on that, especially in clinical. Applying for PhD programs is highly competitive, and clinical is even more so than experimental because there are so few positions. And from a clinical standpoint, what I'd be looking for in a program is how many people they get into their internships. Do they have a good match rate on their internships? And because that will that, from what I understand, will make or break you. Even if you're going clinical, though, you do need that research experience. And I've heard from a lot of clinical students that having a that if they didn't get, that they did get a master's degree along the way because they didn't get into programs right off, and that was a very good route, but only if it really focused a lot on research. So that is one good way to prepare, I think. And yeah, clinical is just too much for me. They're a clinical is high-strung, highly competitive, and good luck on that. My hat's off to anyone who can go that route. I'm not built for it. Okay, well, if anyone does end up having questions down the road, my email address is there. I'd be happy to help anybody on an individual basis with any questions that they may have or along their path. Oh, and I would also like feedback. If you guys want to let me know what was most useful, or email me and let me know what information maybe you wish I would have addressed more in depth or something. That would be helpful for me if I end up doing another one of these in the future.
Well, I would like to offer our thanks to Emily again for giving her time. I am sending over our survey link for you guys. If you could take a few quick seconds to just click on that and submit your thoughts about tonight's programming, that would be very helpful with where we go in planning future programs. So with that, I would like to thank you again for attending. If you have any questions, you had Emily's email, or you could email us directly at global.connections@wsu.edu. Thank you, everyone.